My name is Ava Sinclair. I was 25 years old when my parents decided my sister deserved the future and I deserved the dirt beneath it. The decision was made in a lawyer's office 3 weeks after my father's funeral. My older sister, Madison, sat beside my mother, wearing a confident smile that told me she already knew how this meeting would end. Madison had always been the favorite. When she made mistakes, they were forgiven. When I succeeded, it was expected. By the time I turned 25, I had stopped fighting for approval that was never coming. Still, nothing prepared me for what happened that morning. The attorney opened the will and began reading. To our daughter, Madison Sinclair, we leave Sinclair Heights Apartments and all associated residential buildings. Madison smiled immediately. My mother reached over and squeezed her hand. The apartment complex was worth millions. Everyone in the family knew it. Then the attorney continued, to our daughter Ava Sinclair, we leave all land associated with Sinclair Heights Apartments, including the property beneath the buildings and adjoining development parcels. Silence. Madison blinked. Then she laughed. Wait, she gets the ground? My mother smiled. Somebody has to. The room filled with quiet chuckles. I sat there without reacting. Years earlier, that moment would have broken me. Now it only made me curious. Because the attorney wasn't laughing. In fact, he kept glancing at me, like there was something nobody else in the room understood. Madison leaned back in her chair. I guess Dad wanted us both to have something. My mother nodded. Besides, what would Ava do with apartment buildings? That one stung. Not because it was cruel, because she genuinely believed it. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. Madison left talking excitedly about renovations, investors, and future profits. My mother followed her. Before I could leave, the attorney stopped me. Your father asked me to give you this personally. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Written on the front in my father's handwriting were 3 words. For Ava only. I looked up. What's in it? I don't know, he said. But your father was very specific. He said you should read it alone. For the first time that day, I felt something shift. My father had never been a man who wasted words. Or paperwork. I drove home with the envelope sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The entire way, I kept thinking about something my father once told me when I was 16. We had been standing near the apartment complex while construction crews worked nearby. He pointed at the ground and said, most people spend their lives looking at what's built on top. Then he tapped the dirt with his boot. The smart ones pay attention to what everything is standing on. At the time, I thought he was talking about construction. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment and opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter and one folded document. The letter was short, very short. Ava, if you're reading this, then everyone is looking at the buildings. Good. Let them. Before you trust anyone, take the attached document to Daniel Mercer. Do not show it to your mother. Do not show it to Madison. And whatever happens, don't sell the land. Love, Dad. My heart started beating faster. I unfolded the second paper. At the top was a legal title I didn't understand, but one phrase immediately caught my attention. Exclusive Land Ownership Agreement. Underneath it was a property map, and every apartment building Madison had just inherited was sitting directly on land that now legally belonged to me. At the bottom of the page, highlighted in yellow, was a handwritten note from my father. Ava, the buildings are worth millions. The ground beneath them is worth far more. And suddenly, I realized my father hadn't left me the smaller inheritance. He had left me the secret. I barely slept that night. The letter sat on my kitchen table beside the property map while I stared at it for hours. My father wasn't the kind of man who played games. If he had told me not to sell the land, there was a reason. And if he had warned me not to trust anyone, there was a bigger one. The next morning, I called the number listed for Daniel Mercer. He answered on the second ring. Daniel Mercer. My name is Ava Sinclair. There was a pause. Then his voice changed. Hank's daughter? Yes. I've been expecting your call. That sentence immediately put me on edge. Expecting it? Your father told me you'd call one day. An hour later, I was sitting across from him in a small office filled with property records and legal files. Daniel was in his 60s, calm, careful, the kind of man who looked at paperwork the way mechanics look at engines. He studied the document my father left me and nodded. You have any idea what this is? I shook my head. Not really. He leaned back. Then let's start with the simple version. He pointed to the property map. Your sister inherited the apartment buildings. I know. No, he said quietly. She inherited the buildings, not the land. I frowned. Aren't they the same thing? Not always. He pulled out another file. 20 years earlier, my father had purchased a large section of land on the edge of the city. Years later, a development company built luxury apartments on that land. Instead of selling the property, my father kept ownership of the ground and signed a long-term land agreement. The buildings could be bought, sold, transferred, but the land beneath them remained separate. And now, that land belonged to me. I sat there trying to process everything. So what does that mean? Daniel gave a small smile. It means everyone thinks Madison inherited the fortune. My stomach tightened. And she didn't? Not exactly. He opened another file. Those apartments generate income. I nodded. But every future sale, expansion, refinance, redevelopment, parking project, utility project, or major investment requires cooperation from the landowner. My mouth slowly fell open. The landowner is me. Exactly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel slid one final document across the desk. There's something else. I looked down. It was a purchase agreement, unsigned, dated 2 weeks before my father's death. What's this? A developer offered to buy the entire property. I scanned the page, then I saw the number. My breath caught. The offer wasn't for millions. It was for tens of millions. I looked up immediately. Why didn't Dad sell? Daniel's expression softened because he believed the property would eventually be worth more. I stared at the page. My family had spent years treating me like the less successful daughter, the backup daughter, the daughter who got whatever was left over. And yet my father had quietly trusted me with the single most valuable asset he owned. As I left Daniel's office, my phone started ringing. Madison. I answered. Hey. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Ava, great news. What's that? I'm meeting investors this week. I said nothing. She continued. The apartments are worth even more than we thought. I looked at the purchase offer sitting on the passenger seat beside me. Madison had no idea what she actually owned, or what she didn't. Ava? Yeah? I wanted to ask a favor. There it was, the real reason for the call. What kind of favor? She laughed. Nothing major. Then she said the words that made me grip the steering wheel tighter. I need you to sign a few property papers. I looked out through the windshield, and for the first time, I understood exactly why my father told me not to trust anyone. Because somehow, only one day after the will reading, my sister was already trying to get control of the land. I didn't answer immediately. The silence on the phone lasted long enough for Madison to notice. Ava? What papers? Oh, just routine stuff, she said quickly. The investors want everything cleaned up before we move forward. Investors, not buyers. That word stuck with me, because people only change words when they don't want you asking questions. I'll have my attorney review them first, I said. The line went completely silent. Then Madison laughed. Attorney? Since when do you have an attorney? Since Dad left me something worth protecting. Her tone cooled instantly. Don't make this difficult, Ava. I ended the call before she could say anything else. 2 days later, the papers arrived. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my apartment. Inside were nearly 50 pages of legal documents. I carried them straight to Daniel. He didn't even finish reading before shaking his head. Absolutely not. My stomach dropped. What is it? They aren't asking for permission to use the land. He pointed to a paragraph buried deep in the agreement. They're asking you to surrender control of it. I felt sick. If I signed, you'd lose almost every protection your father built into the property. I stared at the page. Madison hadn't asked for a favor. She had tried to trick me, and somehow that hurt more than if she had simply demanded it. That evening my mother called, which was unusual. She rarely called unless Madison wanted something. Ava, honey. The fake sweetness told me everything. Madison says you're refusing to cooperate. I'm refusing to sign something I don't understand. It's just paperwork. No, Mom, it's ownership. Her voice hardened immediately. Why are you making this difficult? I laughed, not because it was funny, because for 25 years, every disagreement somehow became my fault. You didn't ask Madison that question when she tried to hide what the papers actually did. The silence that followed was answer enough. She knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. The call ended badly. 3 hours later, Madison showed up at my apartment. She arrived without warning, just like she always did when she thought she could talk me into something. The moment I opened the door, she stepped inside. Ava, you're overreacting. I'm not signing. You haven't even heard me out. I crossed my arms. Then explain why the agreement transfers long-term control rights away from me. For the first time, she looked surprised, because she realized I had actually read it, or worse, someone had explained it to me. Her confidence slipped, only for a second, then it returned. You don't understand how business works. There it was, the same sentence I'd heard my entire life. You don't understand. You wouldn't get it. Leave it to someone smarter, someone older, someone better. I was tired of hearing it. No, Madison, I said quietly. I understand perfectly. Her expression tightened. You got lucky, Ava. That one landed, because it was honest. That was what she truly believed. She thought Dad had accidentally given me something valuable. She thought she deserved it more. And she wasn't the only one. Before leaving, she turned back toward me. You're making a huge mistake. I looked her directly in the eyes. Maybe, then I smiled. But if the land is so worthless, why are you trying this hard to get it? For the first time in the conversation, Madison had no answer. 3 days later, Daniel called. His voice was calm, but serious. Ava, I need you to come down here. Why? Because I finally figured out what your father was protecting. An hour later, I was sitting across from him again. He placed a property report on the desk, then he turned it toward me. The city approved a redevelopment project last month. I looked down. The report covered several blocks surrounding Sinclair Heights apartments. New roads, new retail spaces, new construction, new transit access. The entire area was about to explode in value, and right in the center of every future expansion map was my land. My pulse started racing. What does this mean? Daniel looked directly at me. It means the apartments are valuable today. He tapped the report. But the ground underneath them is about to become priceless. And at that exact moment, I finally understood why everyone suddenly wanted my signature. The moment I walked out of Daniel's office, everything changed. For weeks, my family had treated me like the daughter who got the leftovers. Now I knew the truth. They weren't chasing the apartments anymore. They were chasing me. And the worst part? They still thought I didn't know it. The next week became a non-stop parade of phone calls, surprise visits, and fake concern. My mother suddenly wanted lunch. Madison wanted to reconnect. Even relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years started calling. Every conversation somehow circled back to the same topic, the land. One evening, my mother invited me to dinner. Against my better judgment, I went. Madison was already there. Of course she was. The moment dessert arrived, Madison pulled out a folder. I almost laughed. So that's why I'm here. Ava, just listen. She slid the folder across the table. Inside was an offer. A large offer. Larger than anything I'd ever seen in my life. But Daniel had already shown me the redevelopment reports. I knew exactly what they were trying to do. They want me to sell. Madison nodded. You'd never have to work again. I closed the folder. I'm not selling. My mother's face instantly darkened. Ava, stop being stubborn. Stubborn? Your father wanted this family taken care of. I looked directly at her. Then why are you trying so hard to take away what he left me? The table went silent. For the first time, neither of them had an answer. A week later, the real pressure started. I received notice that Madison was moving forward with a major refinancing deal involving the apartment complex. The problem? The bank needed approval from the landowner, me. Without my signature, the deal couldn't move forward. That's when Madison finally stopped pretending. She showed up at my apartment furious. You are costing me millions. No, Madison, I stood calmly. You promised investors something that wasn't yours to promise. Her face turned red. You think you're smarter than everyone now? No, I looked straight at her. I just finally read the paperwork. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something. Then she stormed out. The next morning, Daniel called. Ava. His voice sounded different. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he paused. But you need to see this. When I arrived, he handed me a new appraisal report. I stared at the number, then read it again, and again. The redevelopment announcement had pushed the value of the land even higher than expected, far higher. The property my family had mocked was now worth several times more than the apartment buildings sitting on top of it. I sat back in shock. My father had known. Somehow, years earlier, he had seen exactly where the city was heading, and he had left the future to me. Not Madison, me. Then Daniel smiled. Looks like your father knew exactly what he was doing. I smiled back. For the first time since the will reading, I knew he did. 2 weeks later, everyone gathered in a downtown conference room for what Madison believed would be the biggest day of her life. Investors, bank representatives, attorneys, real estate executives, everyone was there. Madison walked into the room glowing with confidence. My mother sat beside her proudly. They still believed the deal was done. They still believed I would eventually give in. Then the lead attorney opened the meeting. Before we proceed, we need final approval from the landowner. The room became quiet. Madison smiled. Then she looked at me. I smiled back and said nothing. The attorney turned a page. Without Ava Sinclair's consent, this transaction cannot move forward. The investors exchanged confused looks. One of them finally asked the question, "Why?" The attorney answered calmly, "Because Miss Sinclair owns the land beneath the entire development." The room went silent, completely silent. Several people immediately began reviewing documents. Others started asking questions. One investor looked directly at Madison. "You told us your family controlled the entire property." Madison's face lost color. My mother looked equally shocked. For the first time, they were hearing the truth, from someone they couldn't interrupt. The attorney continued. Furthermore, recent redevelopment approvals have significantly increased the value of the land holdings. He projected the newest appraisal onto a screen. The number appeared. Gasps filled the room. The land was worth substantially more than the apartment buildings. One investor slowly removed his glasses. Another simply leaned back in his chair. Madison looked frozen. She had spent months celebrating ownership of the apartments, yet the single most valuable asset connected to them had never belonged to her. It belonged to me. The daughter everyone underestimated. The daughter they laughed at. The daughter they called irresponsible. The daughter they assumed would simply sign whatever was placed in front of her. The meeting collapsed within minutes. Without my approval, the proposed transaction couldn't proceed. Investors began leaving. Attorneys packed their files. The celebration Madison had planned turned into a disaster. When the room finally emptied, only 4 people remained. Me, Madison, my mother, and the attorney. My mother spoke first. Ava. But for once, she didn't know what to say, because there was nothing left to argue. The documents had spoken for themselves. Madison stared at the table, then quietly asked something I never expected. Did Dad know? I thought about the letter, the warning, the instructions, the years he spent protecting the property, and I nodded. Yes. Tears filled her eyes, not because she lost the deal, because she finally understood. Our father hadn't made a mistake. He had made a choice, a deliberate one. He had given Madison the thing that looked valuable, and given me the thing that actually was. A month later, I reached a fair agreement with the investors, one that protected my ownership while allowing future development. The deal changed my life. Financially, I never had to worry again. But the money wasn't the part that mattered. The real victory came later. One Sunday afternoon, I visited my father's grave. The city skyline was visible in the distance, including the apartment buildings everyone once believed were the prize. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone and sat quietly for a while. Then I pulled his letter from my purse. The paper was worn from being read so many times. I smiled when I reached the final line. Trust the ground beneath your feet. For 25 years, I had spent my life trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided who I was. My father never asked me to prove anything. He simply trusted me, and in the end, that trust was worth more than every luxury apartment my sister inherited. As I walked back toward my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Madison. Just 3 words. You were right. I stared at the screen for a moment, then put the phone away. Because this story was never about proving her wrong. It was about finally discovering that I had never been the daughter left with less. I had been the daughter trusted with more. And that made all the difference.